Okay. All right, so we're going to get started. Okay. Good. All right, so we're on chapter 12 today. Is everybody good, by the way? Everybody's feeling good today? Oh, I see there's still a couple of people joining us. Okay. Okay, so we're in the middle of the story of Jephthah, and we're going to finish it today. So that's chapter 12. And just to remind you some of the things we learned about Jephthah in the past. First of all, we know he was a very brave man and a successful warrior. We also know that he was rejected by his clan, which is the Gilead part of Manasseh. Remember that Manasseh, the tribe of Manasseh, one of the sons of Joseph, is split across two sides of the Jordan. It's half of the tribe is west of the Jordan, half the tribe is east of the Jordan. The Gilead family in Manasseh is east of the Jordan. Okay, so that's a very important point to understand as we're going to go into chapter 12. Another thing is important to understand is if you remember when he's rejected by his family because his mother was not an official wife or whatever, he gathers around himself all kinds of, I don't know, down and out kind of people, and that becomes his private militia. So on the one hand, it reflects this is a guy who's he's not your typical kind of leader, and we saw that there was a problem accepting him as a leader, that in the end of the day, the elders of Gilead came to him to fight their battles when they were desperate. There was nobody else, and they actually wanted to give him a lower authority than he looked for, and he insisted on the higher authority, and basically only got it because they were so desperate. But also we can see that he's not, his background is a leader of a militia. It's kind of a gang. He doesn't have a background as being a real leader. Okay, so that's also some of the things we're going to see. There's problems in his leadership to begin with, and all of these things are. And of course, we saw that vow that he made and how rash it was in not being specific. Let's assume he wasn't intending on actually doing human sacrifice, but the way he worded his vow was extremely not specific, and it was very negligent. Okay. And another thing that we learned about this whole thing with the vow was that, and I alluded to it last time, but we'll be doing more of that this time. Was there a solution? Could he have had an official, get out of the vow kind of process? And this is a ceremony. This is a thing that does exist. Could he have? We have no reference here that he tried to get out of it. That he went to the elders, the religious elders, to go to one of the priests, to go to. There's a suggestion that this could have still been in the time of Phineas, and I referred to a midrash that talks about how neither went to the other to solve the problem. That each one, both Phineas and Jephthah, thought they were each too big to go to the other one, and in the process, a girl was lost. And so that is also something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's start with the chapter 12 and see what's going on here. The men of Ephraim mustered and crossed the Jordan going north. Okay, and they said to Jephthah, "Why did you march to fight the Ammonites without calling us to go with you? We'll burn your house down over you." Okay, now this is a pretty extreme kind of situation. But first, let's talk about what's going on here. We remember that Manasseh is east of the Jordan, his part of Manasseh, the Gilead. Ephraim is west of the Jordan. So we have people that says they cried out. It says here mustard, but mustard is an interpretation. The actual translation of the word here is that they cried out. But this use of the word crying out is typically used in the case of war. So you can say that basically when the people from Ephraim are crying out, they're not coming with a complaint, but this idea of mustard is probably the right interpretation. They weren't just crying out, they were already going to war. They approach Jephthah, they already have war in mind. And what is their claim? They're saying, why did you march to fight the Ammonites without calling us? And immediately, instead of waiting for an answer, they say, we're going to burn your house down. Here's people who are threatening. They're coming with war in mind, and they're threatening. Now, who are these people? This is their brothers. This is the people of Ephraim crossing the Jordan to attack and threaten the people of Manasseh, specifically Jephthah, his people. And what does Jephthah answer? Jephthah answers them, I and my people were in a bitter conflict with the Ammonites, and I summoned you, but you did not save me from them. When I saw that you were not our saviors, I risked my life in advance against the Ammonites, and the Lord delivered them into my hands. Why have you come here now to fight against me? Okay, so he says something very important here. What is he talking about? We know from before, if we go back to the end of chapter 10, okay, we see already that there's a period of time when the Ammonites are persecuting and oppressing the people of Gilead, okay? And this is the situation that has been going on already from some time. And so what Jephthah is basically saying to the Ephraimites, where were you all those years that we were suffering from the Ammonites? Did you come then and say, here you are our brothers, we're here to help you, we're here to protect you, let's go do this together? No, you left us on our own. And then he adds, he says, but I did call you and you didn't come. Okay. So what happens then? And Jephthah then gathered all the men of Gilead and fought the Ephraimites. Okay, they go to war. There's immediate war. The men of Gilead defeated the Ephraimites, for they had said, okay, you Gileadites are nothing but fugitives from Ephraim. Being in Manasseh is like being in Ephraim. Okay, here, this particular translation is a very difficult Hebrew. It's very difficult to understand. If I'm going to translate it literally, basically what it says is the people of Gilead struck the people of the Ephraim because they said, ostensibly the people of Gilead said, you are refugees of Ephraim, Gilead within Ephraim, within Manasseh. Okay, and many people have tried to understand what the heck is going on here. What does it mean, refugees of Ephraim? Okay, so one of the interpretations I've seen, and that I think makes a lot of sense, is as follows. There was a time, okay, let's compare this to Gideon, okay? Who's Gideon? Gideon is also from the tribe of Manasseh, but he's from the tribe of Manasseh on the western side of the Jordan. And so if you look at what was going on during Gideon's time, they were having a terrible time. I think it was the Philistines, if I'm not mistaken, on the western side of the Jordan. Okay. And at that time, the eastern side of the Jordan was a much easier place to live. So this interpretation is saying during that time, there were people who left, Ephraimites, who left the western side of the Jordan and went to the east and moved to Gilead. And so basically what Jephthah is doing is he's saying to the people who's coming against them, you are not really Gilead. You are actually refugees of Ephraim. You're Ephraimites. What are you doing here? Okay, now what's behind this? Okay, first of all, in verse 1, the men of Ephraim, they moved to the north. Who are these people? Are these the Ephraimites that live in the west? Or are these the Ephraimites that came to live in the east? It's completely unclear. But it's possible that what's going on here is that all of the war is taking place in the east. And the Ephraimites that are attacking Jephthah are the Ephraimites who dwell in the east. And they're challenging Jephthah and saying, you didn't call us. And basically Jephthah is saying to you, you're not really Gileadites or whatever you're saying. You're really Ephraimites. Why is this a problem? And again, this is from an interpretation that I read. You can accept it or reject it. What was happening was that these Ephraimites were coming into Gilead and taking the land. It's one thing to come and remain as a refugee. It's another thing to come and take land in a territory that does not belong to you. And so we already were having conflict going on here in the eastern part of the Jordan between these Ephraimites who were coming and taking land. And so they basically were trying to establish their presence as permanent residents. And so what Jephthah is saying to it, you are not permanent residents. You are merely refugees. You are refugees and you're originally from Ephraim. So we can see here several lines of divide that are going on. You have a line of divide between east and west, okay, east of the Jordan, west of the Jordan, where you have a sense that those on one side are not feeling connected to those on the other side. And this brings tension, and we're going to see where we saw that kind of issue before. On the other hand, we have a sense that there's an issue here of conflict between Manasseh and Ephraim, where it seems that Ephraim is kind of taking over land that doesn't belong to them, and that creates its own sort of tension. So now let's go on to verse 5. The Gileadites, those from Gilead, again, east, held the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites, and when any fugitive from Ephraim said, let me cross, the men of Gilead would ask him, are you an Ephraimite? If he said no, they would say to him, then say Shibolet. But if he would say Sibolet, not being able to pronounce it correctly, thereupon they would seize him and slay him by the fords of the Jordan. 42,000 Ephraimites fell at that time. So what was this? It seems that the Ephraimites had a speech impediment as an entire tribe. They could not pronounce the sound shah, sh. They could, if they saw the letter that it was just a shin that indicated shah, instead they would say it's sa. So if they caught somebody, they would ask him to pronounce the word shibolet, and if they said sibolet instead of shibolet, they would know that he was really an Ephraimite. And that is how they identified the Ephraimites. So who are these people? It's very possible, going with what we were talking about, if the most of the fight between the Manassehs and the Ephraimites take place on the eastern side of the Jordan, these are the Ephraimites that are trying to escape and go back west. And that's where they're getting trapped. They take over the crossings of the Jordan, and they don't let them flee unless they are not actually Ephraimites. Okay, so 42,000 Ephraimites are slain at that point. This is terrible. This is terrible. This is civil war. Okay, now what I'd like to do is compare this to two other stories. Okay, so the first story is a story that we studied in Joshua. In Joshua, we referred to it, I believe, last week briefly. There was it's Joshua 22, verse 11, okay? A report reached the Israelites, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an altar opposite the land of Canaan, the region of the Jordan, across from the Israelites, okay? So you have this, we talked here, one of the tensions that we're seeing in this story is the tension between east and west, the tension between those on the eastern side of the Jordan and the western side of the Jordan. Well, this is a tension that we've already seen. First of all, it's a built-in inherent tension already when they cross the Jordan. When does this tension begin? The tension begins in the book of Numbers. The tension begins when the children of Israel, under the leadership of Moses, okay, it's still during Moses' lifetime, they conquer the eastern part of the Jordan River. And you have Reuben and Gad asking to live on that side, to settle on that side instead of going over. And there's already a problem here because there's a suspicion these people want to separate themselves. They don't want to be part of the nation. And the biggest fear that Moses had, they don't want to join the nation and defend and help with the conquest of the land of Israel. So then when they ensure and they assure Moses that no, they will not only join the battle, but they will be the pioneers, they'll be the front guard going forward in the battle, and then it was fine. When Joshua takes over in the first chapter of Joshua, again, the issue comes up where he goes to these two tribes, and by that time, half of the tribe of Manasseh has joined, and he says to them, I'm reminding you of your commitment. You need to go, like you promised Moses, you need to go and be the forward guard. And they assured him they will. Okay. And then the battles are over and everybody goes back. And right after everybody goes back, we have this story in Joshua 22. They go back. Here they were, they participate. But immediately there is a suspicion in the West that they really are separating themselves. So they put up this monument, and the suspicion is immediately, well, they're building a rival tabernacle. Okay. Which of course is not the case. Now, who solves the problem here? person who solves the problem here is Phineas. Okay. And in this case, Phineas goes sends a delegation, goes with the delegation, and discovers that indeed they have a peaceful attitude and civil war is avoided. Here, we cannot say the same thing for Jephthah. There is not only a civil war not avoided, but it's horrifically bloody, that they go out of their way to trap the Ephraimites. They don't just say, okay, leave us alone, get out of our hair. They go to the crossings of the Jordan River to trap the Ephraimites and kill them. They want to kill these people. Now, you can say, starting from verse 1, you can say, well, these are not nice people, these Ephraimites. They didn't just say, oh, we're very sorry, you didn't call us, and what's going on? No, they right away said, we're upset they didn't call us, but at the same time, we're going to kill you. We're going to build down your house and everybody with it. Okay, what does he say? We're going to burn your house down over you. It's not just burning down your house, but burning down your house with you in it. Okay, really, really destroying you. And that, of course, is a very aggressive, problematic thing. So on the one hand, you could say perhaps that the Ephraimites already approached Jephthah in a much more threatening way than the 2.5 tribes and the conflict that we saw in Joshua 22. But at the same point, you still have to ask yourself, wasn't there a slightly more peaceful, less bloody way to solve this conflict? Now, there's another story that we can compare this to, and we will remember that a similar story happened with Gideon. If we go back and we look at Book of Judges, chapter 8, okay, we have a story of Gideon. Also, he's involved in this war. Wait, let me just turn off my phone 1 second. Sorry about that. Yeah, I came in, rushed in, and didn't have a chance to silence my phone. All right, anyway, chapter 8, Judges chapter 8. We are in a process where Gideon is involved in wars with the Midianites, and he's really in the middle of the battle. And we have here all of a sudden the men of Ephraim. Same thing here, the same word even. The men of Ephraim. Okay, what did they say? They say to him, "Why did you do that to us, not calling us when you went to fight the Midianites?" And they rebuked him severely. Same thing, except, by the way, where's Gideon from? Gideon is from Manasseh, on the same side of the Jordan as Ephraim, as they're in the west. Okay, so we have a similar kind of situation, but we don't have that east-west divide situation here. Okay, but he answered them, "After all, what have I accomplished compared to you? Why, Ephraim's gleanings are better than Abiezer's vintage. God has delivered the Midianite generals Oreb and Zeeb into your hands, and what was I able to do compared to you?" And when he spoke in this fashion, their anger against him abated. Okay, so here you can see a completely different approach. Whereas Jephthah, the men of Ephraim come and they push all his buttons, and he goes crazy and just goes on this rampage and slaughters them. Okay, in the case of Gideon, you can see that what is his answer? He calms them down by saying, "Oh no, you have a much more important job. I didn't have to call you because you were already busy doing other stuff. You already killed these Midianite kings, Zev and Oreb, and no, you already did a very important job." And that pacified them because he made them feel important. He made them feel that they too were contributing. In contrast, you have here Jephthah immediately lashing out, blaming them, and having this war. So on the one hand, if you compare the two, Jephthah and Gideon, I think Gideon comes out smelling roses and Jephthah comes out looking like a little crazy. If you take into account Jephthah's background, the fact that he's head of a militia, the fact that he was rejected by his family, the fact that we don't see any evidence of real reasoned leadership. And that, of course, is evidence in everything having to do with the vow and his daughter. There's no real leadership there. He is a general. He's a bit of a hothead. He says things without thinking. Here, too, we have a situation where he responds to the accusations of the men of Ephraim without thinking. He lashes out and immediately attacks. We do have to say, though, to his credit, to the credit of Jephthah, that the men of Ephraim coming up against Jephthah were far more threatening than the men of Ephraim coming up against Gideon. First of all, here, the word used in chapter 12, verse 1 is vayitzaek. They yelled out. And as we noticed that my translation translates the mustard, this is seen as a war cry. And he said, they're going to burn your house down with you in it. So from the beginning, the Ephraimites come to Jephthah in a far more threatening way. And so therefore, it's very possible that Jephthah's response was legitimate, or at least somewhat legitimate, in the sense that he was being faced with an attack, and so he attacked back. That was the way to defeat this threat. On the other, and whereas with Gideon, it doesn't use the word mustered or yelled out. It says they said. So when the Ephraimites are coming to Gideon, they're coming in a much more peaceful way to begin with. They may have a complaint, but they're not coming ready for war. I do believe, though, that one of the underlying differences between the situation between Gideon and Ephraim and the situation between Jephthah and Ephraim is the east-west divide. I think built in to what is going on here at the time is this built-in suspicion between those on the west of the Jordan and those on the east of the Jordan. And what was needed here was a Phinehas who would understand the underlying tension and diffuse it. And if we had criticism of Jephthah with regard to the vow, and that he did not go to a person like a Phinehas, whether it would have been actually Phinehas or a spiritual leader who would have been able to fulfill that same function in Jephthah's time, because we're not sure if Phinehas was still alive in Jephthah's time or not. But that type of person, he never tried. He never went to a person like that. Okay. And I think that's also part of the problem, because when what we see before, Jephthah is not a real leader. He just isn't. And I think this goes to show that he fulfilled a very important purpose at a very specific time. But perhaps the elders of Gilead were right to begin with when they wanted him to lead them into battle, but they did not want him to be their leader. He was not leadership material. He did not know how to diffuse a situation. He did not know how to seek spiritual or other leadership advice when needed, not with regard to his daughter, and not here in chapter 12 when he's faced with this kind of terrible situation. The conclusion, verse 7. Jephthah led Israel, or judged Israel, for 6 years. Then Jephthah died, and he was buried. Okay, now I'm going to translate this in an interesting way. The actual Hebrew says as follows, literally, this is the literal translation. He was buried in the cities of Gilead. Now you will see in different translations, they won't say that. They'll say he was buried in one of the cities of Gilead. Why? Because it makes absolutely no sense to say someone was buried in the cities of Gilead. How can one person be buried in more than one city? That's what it says. But when they translate it, they say, well, that's not really what it means. It means in one of the cities of Gilead. Okay? Now, you may want to notice, we talked before a little bit about the way the Bible gives us a measure of how to judge a judge. Okay? And one of the measures is the number of years they judge. When 40 is typically a typological number that talks about a good period, okay? A good period. So we have Gideon, for example. We learned that that the land remained quiet for 40 years when he was the judge, okay? 40 years, that means it's good. It's all good, all right? Now we have one judge who was 80 years. Which one was that? Was that Deborah? Let's see. No, I don't remember. Whatever. There was one that was 80. Here it is. Yep, 80. It was chapter Ehud. Okay, Ehud, at the end, this tells us the end of chapter 3, 80 years. Wow, that's really an ideal time. And then we have those who had shorter amounts of time. Okay, 20 years, for example. 20 years is half a good time, so it's half good. Okay, it's not bad, half good. And you have that kind of a thing. What do we have here? 6 years. 6 years is substantially less than 20, 40, and certainly 80 years. 6 years is not even a period of time. 6 years is a nothing. It's a second. It's absolutely nothing. Now, the Midrash here comes in. It's a continuation of that criticism of Jephthah with regard to his daughter, that he didn't bother going to the spiritual leader of the time to try to solve the problem, okay? Because of arrogance. And the punishment, okay, that the Midrash says, Jephthah is punished. And what does he say? He said he was indeed buried in many cities of Gilead, that in some way his body was dismembered and parts of it were buried all over the place. Now, there is no indication in the text that that's what really happened, other than this weird way of saying he was buried in the cities of Gilead. So I can't tell you that this is what really happened or not, but it's very interesting that what they do is they focus on this very odd kind of wording, that he was born in the cities of Gilead. But clearly what our sages are trying to say is Jephthah was a really problematic character. He did one thing good. He defeated the Midianites, and he brought quiet and security to the people of Gilead. Everything else he did was really problematic. Was he an evil man? No, but he was not a leader. He was rash, and he just wasn't a person that we would be able to look up to in that way. And in this way, I think the Bible really makes it clear, kind of summing up who is Jephthah and how do we judge him. Following the story of Jephthah, we have three very short mentions of three judges, each of whom ruled for a very, very short time. Okay, we have Ifsan. We learned that he's from Bethlehem. He had 30 sons, and he married off 30 daughters outside the clan and brought in 30 girls from outside the clan for his sons. And he ruled for 7 years. Now, this is interesting. This is a short period of time, but Jephthah is even shorter. So you have a 7-year guy who, okay, it's a short term, but Jephthah 6 years, that's even less, okay? Right after that, we have another judge whose name is Elon, is from Zebulun. Now remember what we know about the judges. The judges were more regional or local leaders than they were national leaders. God raises them up to solve a local problem, okay? And which says something about what we discussed earlier, the rift between East and West, the rift between the Ephraimites and the people from Manasseh. Why are they not fighting together? It could be, it's not just a problem of these individual tribes, but the whole perspective of the Israelites at this time is that we're each our own tribes. We have the same faith, but we each run our own lives and we each deal with our own problems. And we see that with Deborah when she calls everybody, and then she gets highly critical of those tribes who don't come. Now, why don't they come? Well, it's not our problem. It's that person's problem. And one of the things that we see in the book of Judges is that is an introduction to the book of Samuel. The book of Samuel is really it brings us to the beginnings of the whole book of Samuel, where the first, second, whatever, is the kingdom, it's bringing a king into Israel. And what the book of Judges is telling us is all the problems that happens in the nation when they don't have a king. And so this is one of those types of things. You have so many local leaders. And so we see here this in verse 8, Ifsan, he's from Bethlehem, he's from Judah. Then we have Elon, he's from Zebulun. And then we have, starting in verse 10, we have a guy, Abdon, son of Hillel, the Pirathonite. Who is that? All we know is at the end, he's buried in the territory of Ephraim. We don't know anything about this guy, okay? What does he say? The first guy had 30 sons and 30 daughters. This guy has 40 sons and 30 grandsons, and they rode on 70 donkeys. He led Israel for 8 years. Okay. So we have 10 years, 8 years, 7 years. They're all more than Jephthah's 6 years, but you got to realize these guys do nothing special. There isn't a single story about any of them, of anyone they saved or any situation they helped. All we know is that they judged Israel. They were leaders, but we don't see them as being saviors. Some of the other judges are because God raised up a savior or someone to save a situation or to rescue the nation from a particular oppressor. We don't have that. But what these stories come to tell us is that local leaders, localized issues, that's it. A very dispersed, divided nation. And all that brings us where we're going to start next week, chapter 13, with the story of Samson. Whoa, what a different fellow that one is. I don't know. In some guys, we're starting to slide. I got to tell you, we are starting to slide. Okay. And we'll see a slide when we talk about Samson. That's it for today. Anyway, open up your mics. Have a comment. Oh, one thing before I forget, I'll also send you an email about this. We will not be meeting next week. I think I mentioned this as well last week. On the 21st, I have a wedding to go to. Childhood friend, her youngest daughter is getting married. And it conflicts with this. And I was trying to figure out any way I could do both, and I just can't. So unfortunately, next week we will cancel and we will resume in 2 weeks. But anyway, open your mics. If you have anything to say or any questions to ask, go for it.
Mazel tov. Enjoy the wedding.
Thank you, Claudette.
Sondra?
Yes.
And the Bible kind of implies that these judges were sequential. One left, another one came, one left, another one came. But as you mentioned, they were regional. They were not national. Is there any evidence that there was some overlap? While one guy was the judge on the east side, there was another guy that was a judge on the west side, in simple terms.
I would say for those three, definitely there's no evidence in either direction. They each ruled for a very short time and very regional, because we don't know anything about anything they did, like they led a war or something. That might tell us about to what extent maybe they encompassed other tribes as well, but we know nothing about them. So it's very possible they could have been very local. What we do know is that they are mentioned. But I think, you know what, it's very interesting. You could say, well, why mention them at all? Like, really, what does this tell us? And I think all it tells us is it gives us a nature of the times. Okay, short-led regional leaders who, all we could say about them, they have 70 children, 30 grandchildren, and then a bunch of donkeys. And really, but in a way, it kind of indicates that this was not a very stellar time, in the history of the nation of Israel.
Yeah, Sondra, I would really agree with that, because when you look in verse 15 with Abdon, the son of Hillel, he's buried in the mount of the Amalekites.
Yeah, he says in the land of Ephraim, in the mountain of the Amalekites. So what probably
of the Amalekites, they were such enemies of,
that's right.
of Israel.
That's right.
To me,
that's
you couldn't sink lower as a leader of Israel than to be buried in the mount of the Amalekites.
Right. Although I have to wonder what that really means. It's very possible. We don't meet any Amalekites in that region. Okay. It's in the mountain of Ephraim. The mountain of Ephraim is actually right where I live, just south. Where I live in Karnei Shomron, it's the southernmost part of Manasseh, and Ephraim is across the mountain. I see it. Okay, so and this is one of the commentaries says that this is actually in the area of Mount Gerizim. Okay, just south of Mount Gerizim. We know of no Amalekites in that area during this time.
True.
So it's very possible that it has the name, the Mount of the Amalekites, because at one time they lived here. Later on with King David, we will encounter a Amalekite boy. We will encounter his conflict with the Amalekites. That's way in the south. Okay. And that's the only place that we know that there are Amalekites at that point. So I wouldn't jump to conclusions there. because I'm not sure. There's no evidence that he really had anything to do with Amalekites at this place.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, well, then we won't see each other next week, but I do hope to see you in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Okay.
Have a
you,
great week,
Sondra.
everybody.
You have a great time at the wedding.
Thank you. Thank you.
The wedding's in Israel, is it?
Of course. Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
Just conflicts
Okay.
time-wise. It starts like at 6:30 and it's somewhere else. I have to get there. So it's not the
Yeah.
kind of thing. I was thinking, can I do this on my phone in the car? And I realized it's not going to work. So in 2 weeks. Anyway, goodbye, everybody.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, goodbye.
I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at cfoic.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.